hope everyone's enjoyed their lunch. We now have a presentation from Lisa MacDonald from the University of Edinburgh. She's going to be discussing her business continuity plans around the Beast from the East, if everyone can remember that one.
Will tell you. I hope you've all had a lovely lunch and are ready to go. I do have a very monotonous voice, so I'll try and sound a bit melodic, try and keep you awake. But my name is Lisa MacDonald and I'm the User Support Manager at the University of Edinburgh. This afternoon I'm going to be telling you the story of how I faced every service desk manager's worst nightmare in the closure of our university campus for 3 days. You'll learn a little bit about service continuity, about team theme songs, and hopefully it'll be of use to some of you. So, I've been working at the University of Edinburgh for around 25 years. I've been in my current role for the last 6 years, and I deliver support for first and second line desktop and application support at the university. I manage the user support team, and you can see some of the guys here on the screen. And we work in the centre of Edinburgh. I currently have 23 members of staff in the team. Everyone does both first and second line support, and we have the Queen as a neighbour, as you can see from the photo there. I'm going to ask you to cast your mind back to how it all began. Back in February of this year, a lot of us in different universities across the UK were going through a period of industrial action, and during that time there were a lot of parts of our university certainly where there weren't as many people around. We weren't seeing as many support calls as usual, and we thought it was a bit of a quiet time and we were going to have a nice relaxing time. We were fairly wrong. At that point in time, what we had decided to do was we had invoked our special cab, because although my own team didn't have a lot of people off due to the industrial action, there was a lot of impact to other areas of the university. So we decided that the safest thing to do was to invoke an emergency cab situation. So we were in a fairly controlled environment. Nobody was allowed to make any changes without authorisation, and we were having a bit of a peaceful time. And at that point, we also had a new director in our university, and Gosha Such had joined us as the new head of user services. And she had spent a little bit of time looking at our strategy and was at a point where she wanted to look at future plans for our organisation. So we thought, it's quiet, everything looks to be running okay. We're going to take this opportunity to all get together as a management team and look at our future plans. So if you picture the scene, it's already a snowy day. Some of the team hadn't made it into work that morning because it was a bad weather day. They had been working from home, but the rest of us were carrying on with our normal roles, and the management team were all together in a room. So we had myself as the service desk manager, we had the head of help services who looks after the library desk, we had our BRM manager, and our Director of User Services, all the people you would thankfully want to have in the room if you're about to face a major incident. So we worked away, talking through strategy in the morning, and as we worked away we could see the weather was getting a bit worse. A few people had looked on Twitter and there were rumours that the Met Office was about to issue a red weather warning, but we put it out of our minds and just carried on with what we were doing. That was until 12 o'clock when the CIO, Gavin McLaughlin, came barrelling into the room at 100 miles an hour telling us that we had 1 hour before the whole campus was going to shut. And at this point we didn't know it was going to shut for 3 days. So there was mild panic. I was shipped off back upstairs to my own department, and a few moments later this email from Sarah Smith came in, who's our university secretary, just confirming our worst fears that the university was about to close and we were going to have to invoke any service continuity plans that we had across all support services in the university. So I headed back off upstairs. Thankfully, I say thankfully, but perhaps it's not. We'd had some opportunities previously to look at our service continuity plans. We'd had a few instances in the last few years where we'd had building occupations, and so some key support services in the university had to relocate or look at different ways of delivering their services. So we'd had a few dry runs at looking at continuity planning, and we'd also tested out a lot of our scenarios for the service desk in particular. And it's the service desk I'm mainly going to be talking about today. It's how to relocate a service desk and keep the show on the road. So I went up to the department and started to look at our continuity plans. I did have the benefit of already having those few members of staff at home, so that we were able to get into contact with them immediately and get them to start handling support calls. We were in a situation where we do have an automatic call distribution system for our telephone calls, but at that point it hadn't actually been set up so that we could have people from working from home. So we had to put out a message immediately to say that the helpline was not going to be accessible via telephone, but that we would continue to do email and web form support for the time being. So while Cindy, one of my colleagues who's in the room today, and another colleague, Kenny, were busy working at home, I started to plan on getting the rest of the team on the road. And when you're doing something like this, there's a number of considerations that you have to make. We didn't have to look at another building or location to move to because the whole campus was closing for that period of time. But it is worthwhile, if you are looking at relocating a service, to get in touch with your facility teams and work through scenarios, find out if there are nearby buildings. If you have several campuses, look at those different campuses and try and identify areas that you can move your services to, and also scope out how much service you can deliver from those locations. I was in a situation where I was going to have to send the whole team home and hope for the best, and with 23 people that can be a bit of an undertaking, but I got on with it. We have a lot of policies at Edinburgh which have been quite well evolved over the years. So the first policy that I looked at as part of this was around our adverse working policy, adverse weather policy. Adverse working is a whole different thing. And our adverse weather policy is something that we renew on a 6-monthly basis. It's a document which I hold as a team leader, which allows me to see easily who in the team lives in an area where they might not be able to travel if something happens, like public transport's removed. I can see whether, if they can actually come into work, that's fine, but if they can't come into work, I can then see whether they have the computing facilities to be able to perform their normal duties from home, or if they're in the third scenario where not only can they not get into work, but they don't have any facilities to work from home. So everyone in my team has a category, and that allowed me to plan the staggered sending home of the team throughout this event. So I got the people who live furthest away off on their way first of all, and they were all given instructions to make sure that once they arrived at their destination, or if they were having trouble arriving there, to get in touch with us and to go off on their way. But obviously in a situation like this, the primary goal is to make sure that the users know what's happening. And again, at the University of Edinburgh, we have a really good policy around working from home. So we published that policy, and that policy includes everything from advice on connecting to the virtual private network to things around giving people guidance on things like IT security, so that they were clear on what they could do from home. So we started to show those policies out across our social media and to email them out to people so that they could start to set off on their way and look at starting to plan their own service moves. And we took it from there. And you can see here on the map it's a wee bit small, but we had quite a distance for people to travel. So some of the people were travelling sort of 20, 30 miles out of Edinburgh. Unfortunately, it's very expensive to live in Edinburgh, so a lot of the team do live quite far afield. But we did have 1 or 2 people who live closer to the office. Our office is right in the heart of Edinburgh, and you can see it there on the red dot. And staff safety is paramount in something like this. You obviously have a responsibility to your staff. You're sending them away from a building in what's potentially going to be a red weather warning within the hour. And you have to be careful to make sure that they're getting home safely. So we're all given strict instructions to phone in once they get home. We set up some communication channels. We made clear the points at which people were to communicate with us, and also from the top level, from the university secretary level down, she made very clear with us at what points we would be communicated to about the event as it unfolded. At this point we had no idea it was going to go on for 3 days, but everything was set out there at the beginning, and again that helped us really with people understanding when they were going to be needed or what was needed of them. And the vital thing for us was to inform users as soon as possible. There is going to be a detriment to service when you're having to invoke any kind of service continuity plan, so it's really, really important to make sure that you're clear to your users the current state of your service, whatever that be. Hopefully it won't ever be total loss of service, but it could happen, and obviously you have to look at the different ways of delivering that news to your users and use any channels that you can. So we used a variety of communication tools across this event. We started out using Skype for business. That was our primary tool that we used on a day-to-day basis within the first line support team. We use it for team chat to escalate incidents. We use it to pass calls on to other people. It also gives other people in our team that extra layer of support if they're maybe out on a support call and don't know the answer. And we've used it for a number of years. And that was the tool we started out using throughout this whole incident. But what we found was that on the second day of the incident, we started to see some issues creeping in, and it was actually myself. I was in the fortunate position where I had no internet for a part of the day. And when I logged back in, I realised that with Skype for Business as a text tool, I couldn't see the history of the conversation, and I couldn't tell what the team had been doing. So at that point, we decided this was a really good opportunity for us to look at trialling our different communication tools, and we took the opportunity to look at Slack. And that was fantastic for us. So we ended up using Slack as a primary tool for the first line support team throughout the event, and they were able to have that chat mechanism there. There was one room for operational chat so that people could clearly see the things that were going on with the service. But another side to it which was really important, especially in this event which went on for so many days, we had a separate strand of sort of social chat, and that gave staff a lot of extra support in times where some people don't always work so well from home on their own. If you're somebody who works very well as part of a team, it can be a very isolating experience to suddenly find yourself at home, snowed in, you're maybe not going to see friends, and you're also being expected to do a job. So it was a really good tool for us, and I'll come on to a few things that we used it for further on. Subsequent to that, though, unfortunately, we have had to move off Slack because we don't have the money for it just quite at the moment. But we've moved on to Teams, and that's given us a similar level of support and the same kind of ability to manage our communications. But it's not just all about the team communications. You do have to use other things like your alerting services, any social media tools, and any email services that you have to make sure that you're communicating to people. And you also have to be mindful about any tools that you choose that are maybe hosted on campus, because if you're talking about some kind of major incident that takes out any of your infrastructure, then you're going to have to factor in that those tools might not be available to you. So I've touched on this already. Setting the update times and sticking to them was really important for us. We found in the first day of running, because we didn't know how long the incident was going to go on for, it was quite difficult for us to define initially when we would need to speak to people. But we just used the standard times that we would have used in our major incident process, which were to communicate with people at 9:30, 12 o'clock and 4:30 in the day. And internally to the team, that did work quite well. During an event like this, your staff are going to have other things that they need to be doing. If it's something relating to weather, we had people who had to go and help their neighbours clear paths, who perhaps were either not able to perform normally because their home environment was different. It can be very different if you've organised a day to work at home on a quiet day where everyone's out the house and you can get peace. But if suddenly everyone in your entire family is snowed in and you've got small children running around and a husband or wife at your side trying to talk to you when you're working, that can bring a very different consideration, and there are going to be different distractions for people. So that was something we had to factor in. We did keep the users informed. We did that in a number of ways. I've already spoken about the initial communication side of things. But one thing that was really important for us is that at the University of Edinburgh, we have a huge amount of distance learners, and for those people, they might not be impacted by any kind of event that you're seeing locally if it is a weather-related one. So it's really important to try and factor in minimising disruption for these people and trying to make sure that they're not going to experience any unnecessary disruption, and that you do have these two types of people. Yes, there were some people who were either on industrial action or snowed in, but there were also other people who were perhaps in countries outside the UK who were having a perfectly normal day and just getting on with their business. And we use things like out-of-office replies on Outlook, and we use standard solutions within Unidesk, which is our call management tool. And we just used those to try and make sure we could be as informative as possible. The out-of-office was really useful for us to give that initial response to any calls that came into our service management tool through either email or web form, because it immediately set the scene. People could see that the whole university campus was closed. We weren't going to be able to visit offices and respond to second line support calls, but we were going to do our best to deliver first line support. And the standard solutions were also useful because although the campus was closed, there were some essential support staff still on campus. We had estate staff who were still having to clear paths in public areas. We had catering staff who were having to provide catering to people in halls of residence. And it was really important that they knew what support could be given to them as well. And we did have to, in some cases, say to people we wouldn't be able to resolve their calls. I'm quite proud of the fact though, that the team across this whole period managed to resolve 352 calls at first line, and only 4 calls remained outstanding at the end, and those were second line calls for people who we actually physically had to visit at the end. But you could end up with more calls, and if it's an incident where it's down to a service loss, you're obviously going to have to do service recovery and then look at getting people back to a working state again from there. So there's probably a lot more to consider in a system type major incident than there is in this particular one. Another thing that was a learning point for us throughout this event was the fact that we realised that we didn't have full visibility of what the other teams were doing. The University of Edinburgh has a huge infrastructure and application and learning, tech, teaching and web teams, library and communication, library and collections teams, and we have our own user services directorate. And while we knew what was going on within our own directorate, we didn't have a lot of clarity on who else was out there, who else had set up to work from home and what were they doing and who could we call on if we needed them. And that became quite important, unfortunately, quite early on. But we have learned since then that it's really important to make sure that you have that visibility across either your own information services group or your college or directorate, and then across the broader university. Try to find out what sort of contingency plans, finance, estates, HR, all these different areas of the university business have, and try and marry them together so that you have this cohesive plan in place. And keep the team informed. One of the things that we saw a lot was the situation where people weren't quite clear on what they were expected to do. Were they allowed to have coffee breaks? Were they allowed to go for lunch? Was it okay if there was an emergency? Could they go off and do something else for a little bit as long as they told you? People need to have clear instruction on what to do in those situations. A lot of a scenario like this where you've got people working from home is around trust, and you have to invest that trust in them and set out some guidelines, but don't micromanage them. And for myself, that was something that was quite difficult to learn. During the first day, I think I did a 16-hour day because I wasn't quite sure when I could switch off and go away and do something else. And we fixed that on the second day by having a rota for the management team as well. And that also meant that because sort of the manager wasn't sitting there watching them all of the time, the team felt a bit more relaxed and were able to just work in a much more normal way. When it comes to resourcing, it's going to be different for everybody, but we had a relatively easy time when it came to resourcing. We were in industrial action period on the first day, the Wednesday, but by the Thursday morning, the period of inaction had ended at that point, and so a large number of university academic staff, students and people had started to work again, albeit from home. And for those people, it was really important that we had enough staff there to support them, but not too many. And you're going to need a different volume of staff depending on the incident. Probably this is an unusual one where you would need less, because normal major incident scenario or business continuity plans, you would possibly need more people or people in different areas. But for us, what we did is we set up a very much pared down rota. We had a few people on duty and everyone in the team took a turn at covering that duty. And that took the pressure off people and allowed them to go away and get on with life at a time where things were just a wee bit unusual. So that was a really useful thing to do. You do have to expect the unexpected. I've touched on it already. One of our team was absolutely adamant they could work from home under any circumstances. And unfortunately, in the cold, harsh reality of the incident, they weren't able to do that. And they felt quite bad about that, but it's about assuring them that as long as you know they've tried their best to help with this incident, then it's all going to be okay. When it comes to support tools, we're very lucky. We use Unidesk, and it is a web-based ITSM tool. Most ITSM tools are now, but you do need to factor in as to whether you can still use your tools if you're not going to be on campus. Are there any restrictions around VPN use, or are there going to be any issues around the infrastructure? We were able to continue to use our tool perfectly normally without any disruption whatsoever, so that was really lucky for us. We also have Bomgar as our remote support tool, and again, that was a real lifesaver for us in some ways. However, it did have some limitations for the rest of the team, because in a normal day-to-day office environment, the staff in my team have 2 pretty large monitors on their desks, and they can have their support tools on one screen, the remote session on the other. But if you then try to do that on a wee laptop screen, it can be a bit of a challenge. And that, in some cases, some of the staff felt that eroded their confidence a little bit. Not everyone is very comfortable with using remote assistance tools. And if you don't feel that you have that confidence because perhaps you're not quite as adept at navigating about the screen as you would be in your normal situation, then that can knock your confidence a bit. So we had to have a few discussions about when it made sense to use remote assistance, and it perhaps maybe wasn't used as much as we would have hoped. Finally, I've put this in as a support tool, but they're not really a tool, and lovely Matt's sitting down there, so I'm sorry I've described you as a tool. But we got a lot of support from our partners at Northumbria University, which is, they run the Norman service. And if you have any out of our service, it's really valuable at a time like this. We were in a situation for the 3 days where we didn't have telephone service during what would be normal office hours. I've explained already we couldn't access our ACD system from home. But what we could do is we could speak to Norman, and in fact Norman proactively contacted us and I think several other Scottish universities that were affected by this weather. And they approached us to see if perhaps we needed to hand over our service to them slightly earlier. And we did that. We normally hand over at 8 o'clock at night, but during this event we handed over at 5 p.m. And that meant between 5 o'clock at night and 8 in the morning on each day that we had this incident, we still had that continuity of telephony support. And in fact, it was absolutely normal running. It's exactly what they would have got in the event of a normal day. So that was a really powerful tool, and it's really useful to speak to any partners you have like that about any arrangements that you can make to maybe adjust your service or to look at any plans they can offer you to help support you through these sorts of events. I would love to say it was all plain sailing, but it wasn't. I said that on the Thursday morning everybody came back from industrial action, and unfortunately that coincided with everybody wanting to use our VPN service. And round about 10 o'clock, there was a lot of chat on Skype. We were on Slack by that point, on Slack, and people started to say, looks like there's a VPN issue here. We're getting a lot of calls from people saying that they can't connect. And it wasn't failing in the same way every time. So we invoked our workaround, and we sent an email out in the vain hope that somebody in the network team was out there. And they were, and they confirmed quite quickly that our VPN service just wasn't quite scoped up to cope with the capacity of so many people needing to work from home. So they very quickly increased the connections and we got up and running. We had another minor blip, and then after that we had stable running for the rest of the time. But it was a real indicator to us that that was perhaps something that we just assumed that would always be okay. But it hadn't quite been load tested well enough to cope with potentially most of the university trying to use it at once. So it's really worthwhile making sure that you have tested your services in that way. And I know a lot of people do this rigorously, but there will always be something you've not tested, and you probably will never know until you have something like this going on. At this point, though, I wanted to say something about the team, because anyone who knows me will know I love my team a lot. I know we all love our teams, but I really do have a good batch of staff, and their camaraderie, their morale and their goodwill were what got us through this event. You have to have a lot of trust to send 23 people off to all different parts of Scotland and hope that they're going to do the job for you once they get there. But my guys did. We had everything from the Helpline song, which you can see in the middle there. I'm not sure it's going to win an Ivor Novello award for lyrics, but one of the team did write a wee song to cheer everybody up. But we had things like one of the team, John, who you can see in the top left there, he sent us a daily photographic report. He lives 2 minutes from the office. So he went out and took a photo blog every day to let us see the state of the area and just to cheer everyone up. We had a lot of cat supervisors. My own cat Millie there was making sure that I did my job. Somebody had a neighbour's cat come in and make sure they were doing their job. But it was just an indication that people were doing different things. But it was nice to sort of have that team spirit there and people to share their own stories. We did have a few pictures that I haven't been able to share because they weren't safe for work, of snow sculptures, I'll call them, that some people find in their local area. But generally, the chat tool was imperative to us, and it was lovely to see the team. In a big team, it's rare that everyone's in the office at once. We're all off doing other things, but this was a real opportunity for everyone to get together, to speak together, and I think they all became a lot closer than they would do normally, and it was really lovely to see as a manager. And I think keeping that camaraderie actually really did cultivate that team spirit and make everyone feel that there was gathering pride in the number of calls that we were closing, and everyone became more and more proud as time went on as to the number of calls that we'd seen to, and kept going and kept focus and didn't get distracted by skiing or sledging or building snowmen. So that was really, really lovely as a manager to see that. We did eventually reopen, thankfully, I'm very pleased to say. On the Saturday morning, we were told around about 9 o'clock that the main library building would be reopening again. And so I was able to get one of our team in and to get the helpline up and running again. I was really lucky that we didn't have a backlog. We had those 4 calls, but they were going to wait till the Monday. So we actually went into fairly normal running on the Saturday. There was obviously still industrial action, so we were perhaps running with slightly different support services underpinning the service. But on the whole, the library and IT user-facing services and all the estates and other colleagues got back on campus on the Saturday. And by the Monday, everything was back to normal again. We did have slightly reduced hours for some of the time, so we did have to set expectations for our users that not everyone would be running without a backlog, and that perhaps they might have to wait a little bit longer to get things done. But all in all, we were fairly back to normal by the Saturday. And moving on from there, we went on to review the event, as any good person does. We did leave it a little while because we wanted to wait until we were in a period of smooth running again, and we'd had time to review and evaluate the situation. And we did learn an awful lot of things. Although we did have a fairly good service continuity process for my own team to begin with, it can always be improved, and we've improved it a lot, and it will never be perfect. But some of the things we learned were: make sure you do have that business-wide process. Make sure that you speak to estates, you speak to your infrastructure teams and your application teams. You know what HR can expect. You know what estates can do for you. One of the calls my team had to deal with very early on was that the university closed all the buildings at 1 o'clock, apart from the main library, which they did keep open just to make sure that if anyone was snowed in, they could go there. That was kept open for a little while, but otherwise all the buildings were closed. And we actually had a student contact helpline very soon after to say that they had popped out for lunch and come back to find the School of Art library locked up. So we were able to get in touch with the estates and get them back into the building and get their belongings back and get them off on their way. But that was only because we did have that bit of visibility that there were still estate staff around. You do need to choose and use the best tools for the situation, and make sure that you factor in anything like their ability to be used off campus. You may find that tools don't work in a scenario, and in that case I would recommend trying to write them out of your any future business continuity plans and try and replace them with something that will do the job. Maybe not perhaps quite as perfectly as that original tool, but that will give you the best service offering that you can do in the situation. You do need to ensure your user-facing services are scoped up to cope with the increased load. I've covered a bit about VPN already. And you do need to set your expectations, primarily for your users, but also around your staff. And then finally, to regularly review and test your continuity plans. I was speaking to a colleague in another part of the University of Edinburgh. We have a company that's a partner institution with the university, and she does a very similar job to me. She's a service desk manager. And she said that about 2 or 3 weeks ago, she'd had to suddenly invoke her service continuity test. And what's happened was, about 6 months ago, our manager had come to her and said, okay, we're going to have this test scenario. You're going to run through your service continuity plan, but I'm not going to tell you when. So 2 or 3 weeks ago, she's merrily working away at her desk, and the hand comes over her shoulder, and a piece of paper drops on her desk saying the building's on fire. And she hadn't told her team, so she had to just get her team organised, get them off to where they needed to go. They had the additional pressure of being an organisation which has financial penalties for not adhering to their SLAs, so she had to bear that in mind. But she had to get her team off and move to another building and start their service running from that new location. They did have another team there as a stopgap because it was a test case, but it was something that she said was just absolutely invaluable to her, and it's something I would recommend doing. I would hope nobody ever has to go through your campus being closed for 3 days, but if you can find a break in the year, which I know is very hard in higher education, but if you can find a break in the year where you can test your service and take the time to learn from that, then it is an incredibly valuable thing to do. Once we were finished, we did celebrate our success. I've always been a great believer that you should celebrate your team's successes. You should recognise hard work. It does breed goodwill, but giving your staff a sense of pride is one of the best things you can do as a manager. But luckily we also have a new principal, Peter Matheson, and he also shares that sentiment. It's a widely held sentiment across the University of Edinburgh. But what Peter did, after he got over having the baptism of fire of having UCU action and a campus closure in his first month, he took the time to put a post out on the university website to thank the staff for their work. But better still, he actually put on a drinks reception for all of the support services staff across the university. And that was a really nice touch. It let us see that we were all valued. All support services are quite often the hidden heroes of any organisation. But it let us see that we were valued. It showed that he recognised those bits of the business and allowed him to get to know us as well as people. And it was a really lovely event. It was great for some of the team to go along and just to relax and have a bit of time to celebrate that hard work that they put in. And then finally at the bottom there I've got some plaudits from our users. We do a regular survey, customer satisfaction survey, and there were some lovely comments that came through from the users just recognising that they had acknowledged that despite the fact we were running in a very unusual situation where the services were not on campus, they had still received exceptional help. So it was really lovely to be able to share that with the team at the end. So in summary, just to wrap up, do prepare. Do look at things like adverse weather policies. I'm going to share some policies at the end here and some documents. There's some really useful things on the UCISA pages around major incident policies and things like that, and there'll be links here which I think are going to be shared at the end of the conference in the slides. But make sure you prepare, have those policies ready. Don't leave them in a drawer stagnating and getting dusty. Get them out every now and again. Every time you change a bit of your user-facing service, get your continuity plans out and look at those again and make sure you're keeping them up to date. Communicate. Make sure that everyone communicates with you and that you communicate with everyone. If you feel you're not getting the communications you need to either manage your team, to deliver the service, if your manager's not giving you the right communications, or if you hear from your users that they're not being communicated with effectively, make sure that you do that. I know Barclay said a lot about communications today already, but a lot of the things he said are very applicable to the situation. Set your expectations for your users, set the expectations for your staff, use the tools you have, value your staff, and review your processes regularly. So I've repeated myself a wee bit there, but those really are the key points to this sort of incident. And just to wrap up, I think it was a real learning experience for us. It showed me that I do have a very good team, but it also showed that we have very good colleagues and we have fantastic users who are very tolerant of the fact that we were not running as we normally would. And that's me.
Thanks very much, Lisa. I thought that was a great presentation. But I just want to add a couple of points on that. So Durham had a very similar experience but decided not to close the university. So we had a lot of staff who were trying to get to the university, some who decided not to come, but I was really pleased to see Edinburgh took the decision to close the university, which I think was a sensible decision. Durham was a bit different. We had colleges, we had students living on site and things like that, and porters and domestics, these types of people, and the decision was not to close the university. But as a service desk manager, I thought it was very useful. There's a lot of things that I'll take away from this in implementing my continuity plans, and I think there'll be other people in the room who'll be exactly the same. So can I have another round of applause for Lisa, please? And finally, is there any questions for Lisa?
More of a comment than a question. We rehearsed our version of this in December and said, if we had got a snow day, what would we do with our service desk, etc., and walked through it. And one of the consequences of that was we realised we needed a conversation with Norman that has subsequently taken place of, if we closed our telephone line, could we actually transfer all our calls to Norman? Now, of course, the problem is if the whole country is covered with snow, Norman probably can't cope with everybody transferring their phone lines to Norman. But if it was just localised, Norman did actually agree that they would take over calls for the whole day if they had the capacity. And it was really useful to have that conversation in advance rather than during.
Yeah. We had several conversations in the past, and in fact, because we didn't have to pass over out with our normal agreement, I think and hope it didn't cause Norman too much of an issue. But you're absolutely right that with any partner like that, it's worth knowing well in advance. And I think, personally, having been a customer, Edinburgh University, I've been a customer of Norman for a number of years now. And we've seen that improve a lot over the last few years, where there is that good level of interaction and engagement in trying to find out what scenarios that Matt and his team can help with. And that is a really important thing, to try and get that type of relationship with any partner that you have like that. As you say, don't wait till the worst happens, try and do it ahead of time. But we do get a lot of engagement meetings with Norman, and that's the time where we can discuss these things and look at these different types of scenarios and see what we can do. So it's a really, really valuable relationship for us.
No more questions?
I'm free.
Thanks very much, Lisa.
Okay, thank you.